Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Claudia Monicelli with another episode of Multiple Voices. My Multiple Voices podcast, true to its name, includes different series. For example, we have the Voices of Love, where we discuss relationships, the voice of empowerment, the voice of laughter and play, the voice of pleasure, and the magical voice of archetypes and how they change the way we live. But we also have the voice of memory that includes everything from history to discussions of past life regression. There's also writing voices, where we interview both seasoned writers and authors who have just started getting their feet wet with writing, and we learn what can work for you as potential writers. Our series called Voice of the Spirit discusses different forms of spirituality and religion. And then Channeling Voices is a series that covers what happens when you channel, but is also extended to mediumship. Take a moment to review this podcast if you've enjoyed listening, and leave a hearty 5 stars. I'd appreciate it. Enjoy your listening. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with another episode of the Multiple Voices podcast with Kate Wallinga. Kate, say hello to our audience.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Kate is in Salem, Massachusetts. That's always a mystery. It's always been a mystery, Salem. I've never been. But let me introduce you so you know who she is. Kate is a forensic psychologist, and that's quite unique. It's a new sort of profession. Maybe you can tell us when it was offered as a profession, how many years ago. And she has also turned into a podcaster as well. She has her own show. It's called Ignorance Was Bliss. And then what else? She has no rules. All right. Now, I like this woman already. She has no rules. And so she didn't want to pigeonhole herself in just one genre. So on the show, she chats with a wide range of people, wide range of topics as well. Let me ask you first, tell us, who is Kate Wallinga? I always like to know, how was high school for you? Those are probably the worst years in a person's life, adolescence. What were you like? And where were you?
I grew up in upstate New York, and high school was awful.
Yeah.
Both of my parents, in their different ways, were unhealthy people.
Yeah.
And I had some social stuff, we'll say, that wasn't great. And so I lucked out, because at the end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year of high school, somewhere in there, I learned of a program in northern New York that allowed me to combine my senior year of high school with my freshman year of college.
Oh, how
so
nice.
I escaped. Yes, I escaped.
But
a
where
year
was
early.
that? Where
In
did
Clarkson?
that take?
I went to Clarkson University for my undergrad, which is an engineering school. And I had no special interest in engineering.
Is that Kodak country? Is that near Kodak country? Kodak, I mean, Rochester,
Kodak
New York.
is Rochester, New York, which is where my husband is from. That's Western New York.
Okay.
This is, so New York State is like a backwards uppercase L. And
Yes.
so Rochester would be on the sort of midway on the horizontal part of the L.
Yeah.
And Potsdam, where I went to school, is on the very tippy top of the vertical part.
Okay.
So the closest cities were Montreal and Ottawa.
To the city. Okay. So now you have this, you worked that out. You put the last year, the first year, and then you started. What did you study then?
I started studying engineering because it's an engineering school.
Yeah.
I'm decently good with computers and technology. I didn't much like it, but Potsdam being as far north as it is, it's dark all the time. It snows from about October to May every year.
Yeah. Oh,
and
Jesus.
So, people are miserable. It just sort of seemed like the thing to do. And my junior year of college, I got sick. I got a kidney infection.
Oh.
And this is in 1994. And so back in the day where people read paper books, when they were stuck in the
Yes.
hospital.
Right.
And someone brought me the book Mindhunter, which the
Ah,
Netflix show is based on.
right.
And it's about profiling in the FBI. And I thought,
Nice.
interesting. This
Mhm.
guy seems to like his job. I'd like to like my job. I think
Yeah.
I want to try this. So I ended up taking a medical leave that semester. And when I returned, I dropped all of my engineering classes
Oh.
and graduated ultimately as the only psychology graduate of my class of 1995.
Ooh. Ooh.
And so from there, I got master's degrees in criminal justice and mental health
Mhm.
counseling and went on to get my doctorate in clinical psychology.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It's interesting. Psychology, clinical psychology, especially, but psychology in general in the United States is something you could slit your wrists, uh, getting into in terms of um, I don't know what to call it actually. We have registers, boards taking a national exam or a state exam to become a psychologist. I'm not sure if it was that bad when you finished, but today it's people just change what they're studying. It's just so difficult. It's a very closed knit profession.
I think it depends on the state.
Yeah,
Each
probably.
different states have different boards for
Yeah.
it,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't. I mean, you do what you feel like you need to do to get the
Yeah.
job that you want.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of being so I the book and show Mindhunter, that's about profiling. And
Right.
I initially was going to go into profiling. I interviewed with the FBI
Can you tell us
and
exactly what
I'm
profiling is for our audience who don't know what
yeah,
that
I'm
is?
getting there. Yep,
Mhm.
for sure.
Good, good.
Because people don't. And so profiling is if you believe that there's a series of connected or even a single really unique crime, and you put together assumptions about who would have done this thing and
Yeah,
try to go put together a it's sort of like the paperwork you might fill out at a doctor's office with
right,
demographics, except
right,
without the name on top. And you put together that paper and then you give it to the local police and you say, "Here's the information about the person. You go find the name on top."
right.
And I was initially going to go do that. But first of all, there are aspects of being a profiler that didn't fit with the lifestyle I wanted to have.
For
Uh,
example,
for
what would
example,
that be?
you become a law enforcement official and you
Mm,
work as a plain old FBI agent for usually 3 to 5 years before you have the opportunity to get involved in the behavioral analysis unit.
mm-hmm,
I was not comfortable with having a gun in my home.
mm-hmm.
I wanted kids, and
Yeah.
I'm not pro-gun myself.
Mm-hmm,
So that was part of it. Also, in order to become a profiler, you have to be prepared to travel about 48 weeks out of the year
mm,
because you don't wanna live in a town where they have year-round serial killers for you to profile, so you have to
right.
travel around the country to find them. And again, I wanted to be a mom as well. I had my first child at 22.
Oh,
So, between those 2 things, I decided, "Okay, can't do that. Can't do the profiling thing." So, instead, I went into forensic psychology, which is effectively any form of psychology that also has an involvement with the criminal justice system.
mm,
So sometimes it's pre-trial,
yeah.
deciding whether someone is competent to stand trial, what their diagnosis is, that sort of thing. Other times it's post-conviction. You help figure out the best place either within the prison or which prison for them to be placed at. Or sometimes you work in a prison to figure out how's everybody doing?
Yeah,
And is
yeah,
anybody sort of on the edge of things and what can I do? It's a lot like what I use the word normal loosely here, but what a
yeah,
normal psychologist would do on the outside. I
yeah.
never did therapy except
Mm-hmm.
what I had to do for school because I'm terrible at it. So instead, I just don't have the patience. You have
Yeah.
to be a good therapist, you have to really go at the pace of your client.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very deeply important and valid skill that I don't possess.
Oh, I understand perfectly. Let me ask you, is it basically a man's world?
Very
Or
much, very much. I worked in a men's prison for several
Mhm,
years, and then even when I went so after about 5 or 6 years in the prison, I changed to work in crisis work, which is in the emergency room or
Yeah.
people's private homes or in offices, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
schools. Both of those tend to be male-dominated fields.
Okay.
S
Okay.
But so is engineering. I always sort of got
Of
used to
course.
it,
Hmm.
and you learn how to play with the boys.
Yeah. Yeah. Play with the boys. Yeah. Yeah. You know why it's so interesting to me to talk about forensic psychology? Because the first thing I thought of when I read about you, when I saw that possibly you might be coming on my show, is that this is a great background to have for novel writing, to get stories on a page. Say the main protagonist could be, Kate Swift, the forensic psychologist, and she gets in, and because you have all of the scientific background, and the language has to be particular. Did you ever think of that?
Kind of, but and I have 2 simultaneous thoughts, which I do a lot. One
Hmm.
one is that having been so steeped in the career and in the field for a long time, I don't suspend disbelief very well anymore. So I'm not
Wait, wait, wait,
good
wait, wait,
at
wait, wait, wait. Stop, stop. When you say don't suspend disbelief, couch that in more precise terms. Give us
That's
a
what I'm
more.
doing. Yep,
Okay.
that's what I'm doing.
Excuse
Is
me. Hmm.
I'm not good at if they get a detail wrong, whether it is on a TV show or in a movie or in a book, small details I'll let go. No
Hmm.
big deal. The wrong jargon for a diagnosis, something like that. That's fine with me. But there are shows, for instance, Criminal Minds
Yeah.
relies very heavily on one specific trope in multiple episodes, and that
Yeah.
is that they go and visit a bad guy in a
Right.
prison, which right up front bothers me because
Yeah.
a lot of the people in prisons are fantastic people who made a
Hmm.
big mistake.
Right.
But they'll go and visit a bad guy to figure out their
Hmm.
thing, and the bad guy will tell them some piece of information that's necessary for what they're doing,
Right.
and they pull out their cell phone to call their team or their boss, and that makes me insane because you know who has cell phones in prison? Only the inmates. They have
Yeah. Right.
contraband illegal cell phones. That's it. Employees, COs, even the warden, they don't have cell phones. You're not allowed to.
Yeah.
There's a little, like the little pigeonhole
Right.
mailboxes that they
Hmm.
used to have. That's where when you go to work, if you
Hmm.
forget to leave your phone in the car, you walk in, you stick your phone in your little mailbox, and then you go through the metal detector.
Hmm.
Staff don't have that.
Hmm.
So whenever I see things like that in shows or books, I'm like, that's not how it works. So one problem is that I'm so steeped in details like that, that
Hmm.
I think, make it either too wordy or too dry to try to explain, like, "Here's why this wouldn't happen."
Uh-huh.
And so, like, I understand why they do it on Criminal Minds. They cut out
Hmm.
some time, and they
Yeah.
go to everybody understands what it means to have a cell phone and what it means to make an emergency call, and so it's easier for the
Yeah.
audience. I get that, but I struggle with that. Another issue is that I have a history of traumatic brain injury.
Uh-huh.
I spent a week and a half in a coma in 2010
Mm.
due to complications after childbirth, and then
Ah.
in 2016, I developed epilepsy. And so
Hmm.
both of those
That's
in their way,
uncommon, isn't it?
it is
That
it
it
is.
comes
It was
in
in my
afterwards.
30s? Yeah.
Yeah,
It was a
it's
weird,
very
people are usually
uncommon.
either born with it or
Yeah.
develop it later. I'm a medical mess, like, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, the literal physical process of writing is
Yeah.
very difficult for me,
Hmm.
and that is why I started podcasting rather than
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. 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 But obviously, my question was directed to you. Would you consider writing? Now, there's so many ways you can write, and you know that you can dictate your content, obviously, and it's typed up on your. There's you have to edit it, of course, but there's I'm hoping that in the future you would consider that more closely.
I
And
don't know if you're giving enough credit to the seriousness of a TBI.
no,
Honestly,
no, no,
that
I am.
that the process of writing requires a long-term form of thought and an organization of
Obviously.
words that I wish that I had. You know,
Oh,
there's a lot of
I see
stories
what you're
that I
saying.
would love to tell, but I've kinda had to let that go a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because it was such a
It's a
frustrating
process. I mean, it is
process
a
for me.
process. I'm a writer. I
Mhm.
know what writing is. But if, well, it's just a thought to keep in the back of your mind because, it's a long road you're going to travel down. You never know where it'll end up. But because mainly because these stories, like you yourself said, they aren't told from the desk of. And it would be wonderful if you could open your desk to, or be a consultant for that kind of thing. That would be really interesting. Let's play a game. Um, so you're just finishing your degree, right? You're back and you just finished your degree or last exam, or you're about to get your degree. What's in your head? Have you had you at that time thought of what would be cool for you to do? What if you could choose exactly the type of work, irrespective of your disability or what has happened to you? If you could choose, what would that be?
I mean, I think I got to do it. I was
Mm,
very lucky with that,
hmm
that I got to spend most of my 20s and my early 30s doing the work that I wanted to do. I've never been stuck isn't the right word, but let's go with it for the moment. I've never
Yeah.
felt dragged down by the things that I can't do. I'm more prone to, okay, that's not a thing I'm good at, or that's not a thing I'm
hmm
comfortable with, or that's not a thing I'm able to do. What can I do instead? How can I use what I have instead?
hmm
And so starting the forensic work was very much a case of I don't feel like profiling is the right answer. So we're going to take a little bit of a turn and I'm going to
hmm
use the things I've already learned, but from a different perspective. And then when I sort of literally lost the ability to write and
Yeah.
to tell coherent
hmm
stories, I started thinking, well, what can I do? And one of the things that I could do was still sort of explain complicated topics
Yeah.
in layman's terms. And that's ultimately how the podcast ended up, and I have served as consultant on other podcasts before
hmm
and other writing works
hmm
before when someone says, "How does this work? What is this like? What
hmm
does schizophrenia mean, or what does it mean to be not guilty by reason of insanity?" Those are things I know, and so I've
hmm
been very lucky to still use them.
hmm So let's talk about your podcast. There is, I'm going to, in the description of the episode, of course, I will write the name of your podcast, Ignorance Was Bliss. Now, why Ignorance was Bliss? Why that name?
Well, it started as a true crime podcast
Yeah.
because whoever they are, tell you write about what you know, talk about what
hmm
you know.
hmm
And I listened to a lot of true crime
Wait a
shows.
minute. Wait a minute, Kate. What is the difference between true crime and fake crime? I mean, crime is crime, isn't it, or no?
I know, I hate the
Okay.
terminology. I really do. But true crime is the name of the genre
Okay.
for writing and
Okay.
podcasts.
I see.
And so and it's meant to differentiate between some form of fact-based information as opposed to
Oh,
outright fiction.
okay. I get it. I get it.
And so the 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 opportunity to sort of explain to people like this is the schizophrenia, for instance, this is what it is not,
Uh huh.
and this is what it is. That was delightful for me in a lot of
Okay.
ways because I think that
Yeah.
information needs to be out in the
Uh
world.
huh.
And so being able to find ways to still use the things I do have and the
Yeah.
skills I do have has been a lot healthier for me, I think, than
Yeah.
pounding my head against a brick wall and,
Mm-hmm.
resenting the things I don't have.
Well, you mentioned now schizophrenia a few times. Let's talk about some of the episodes that you really, really liked. That,
That would
you
be
know,
an early one, and that's I guess where I sort of I derailed myself a bit, and I apologize. But so early
that's
on,
okay.
one of my earliest episodes is about schizophrenia to
Uh huh.
set up for a later episode
Uh huh.
with about a true crime story that involved someone who had been diagnosed with it. And so my show started in that genre because that's what I knew.
Uh huh.
The problem is the true crime genre of podcasting isn't especially healthy for
In
there
what
are some
way? In what
excellent
way?
there are some really excellent true crime podcasters. I
Yes.
want to get that out of the way. But there are others who, they get a bit gatekeepy about what is true crime and what isn't, and I'd
Okay.
be like,
Wait, give me an example because I'm not following very. What would
well,
not
I was
be?
told my show wasn't true crime enough because I was busy explaining how is it that someone would come to do a certain thing, or what is this, what does it mean to be not guilty by reason of insanity or
Uh
competency to
huh.
stand trial? Like I'd be explaining that side of things, and
Mm-hmm.
people would say to me that, true crime means you're telling a narrative of a crime.
Yeah.
And my response to that would be like, okay, but see, I've worked in a prison, and so I feel like I know, I have some ethos here. I have
Yeah.
some study behind it, and all due respect to
Yeah.
other people who
Yeah.
create
Yeah. Yeah.
podcasts, but they've never even been inside a prison. They're
Sure.
getting their information
There's
from
more
Wikipedia.
journalism, that
E
rather than.
Even that is a little farther than some go. Like, journalism implies some legitimate research, and
Yeah.
there are people who are just like, "You know what? I'm gonna drink and I'm gonna call the bad guy bad names, and that's my podcast."
No,
And
come on.
I'm not
No,
making this up.
I don't
I
believe it.
absolutely
I don't
swear to
believe
it.
it.
I wish I was kidding,
Well,
honestly,
let's
and
just say
and
there are a lot of podcasts out there.
and I would say probably half of the true crime ones out there are are involving some form of alcohol and some form of giggling with friends about how terrible the
Okay,
bad
I
guy
get it.
was,
Mhm,
and that I don't want that censored. I don't want that
mhm.
canceled. I want people to create the shows they wanna create,
Sure.
but that's not for me. And I was starting to get people say to me, "What you do isn't really true crime," and I'd be like, "Oh, okay."
In
So
public
it's
or
Oh,
on the
yeah,
show?
both a little bit.
Mhm,
And so my decision was, again, rather than bang my head against this brick wall and try
mhm.
and force the genre to accept the legitimacy of what I
Yeah.
knew and had done, instead I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna pull the lens back," because what I really love about podcasting is connecting with people.
Mhm.
Is the
That's what it's
opportunity to
about.
talk to
Mhm.
people. Exactly. And so I'm gonna still talk to true crime creators and writers, but I'm also gonna talk to published authors in other genres and
Yeah.
actors and, really anybody who wants to come on my show in large part because that's the fun thing is
Mhm,
connecting with people and learning their story. And so I went from pretty solidly true crime more into consider it like being a story collector, and I feel like if you can understand what it is like for someone to have chronic anxiety or to be a
mhm,
parent or just to sort of generally develop empathy about
mhm,
anything, then I can take it the next couple of steps for you to understand what it would be like to murder someone or to
mhm.
be a serial killer or the like.
Mm.
So ignorance was bliss, meaning,
Yeah.
didn't you feel better before you knew that?
Right. I get it. I get it. Good. Now I got it. But as you're talking, I'm thinking of so many things because, all right, let's say when you were ignorant, was that before you moved to Salem, Massachusetts? Where does Salem figure in where you're living now?
Salem is cheaper than Boston. That is the
Okay.
basic answer. We're about
Help
10
me.
miles
Is
away.
south or
We're
west?
north. We're north,
We're okay.
slightly northeast of Boston, about 10 miles away, so sometimes that's only about a half an hour drive, and sometimes that's an
Yeah.
hour and a
No,
half.
but I mean, why that area? Did you grow up in that area? Because you talked about
No, I grew up in
ah,
upstate New York, but
yeah,
I went
right.
to grad school in Boston, downtown
Ah,
Boston. I lived in downtown Boston for a while, but then
mhm.
when my now husband moved out to the area to join me, we couldn't afford
Uh-huh.
Boston
Yeah, 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 yeah.
reliably, and so we kinda looked around at where's got a place with apartments that we could afford, and we ended up in Salem.
Mhm, mhm.
And it's been fascinating to live in a tourist town. That's not a
It
thing
is
I'd
a
ever
tourist
done.
town. Yeah.
It is. Well, especially because the witch hysteria didn't happen here.
Yeah. Well,
Didn't happen in Salem. Didn't. It
but
happened in a different town altogether.
in a different country too. I mean, the witches
No,
are
no, it
all over
happened
the world.
right, but when they
Yeah.
talk about the
Yeah.
Salem witch hysteria, they mean a place that was called Salem Village,
Mhm.
and where I live now it was called Salem Town, and
Mm.
after the witch hysteria was done, the town that was called Salem Village sort of looked around and went, "Oh,
Yeah.
we just murdered 25 innocent men, women, and children
Mm.
and stole their property. That's not a good look. Let's, change our name." So they're Danvers now. That's the town of Danvers, and that's where it happened. The only things that actually happened in what is still called Salem is where one of the old jails was, and it's where Gallows Hill is, although
What's Gallows
Gallows
Hills?
it's where they were hanged.
Ah, okay. Okay.
And that's where all prisoners, all
Mhm.
convicted prisoners were hanged at that time. We didn't confirm I say we, people who
Right.
live in Salem didn't
Locals.
confirm that those accused and convicted of witchcraft in 1692 were hanged on Gallows Hill until 2015.
Uh-huh. I
So
see.
we didn't really know.
Mm.
And so now we have all of this tourist traffic, especially in October. People come out the whole month of October leading
Halloween.
up to Halloween,
Yeah.
exactly. And it gets frustrating at times because you get, you know, cute people from the middle of nowhere who show up and
Mm.
wear their little floppy witches hats and they
Yeah.
think it's fun and cool. And I'm like, you're memorializing murder.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
yeah.
that is what
I
happened.
know a couple of witches, local witches in Salem. I had things to do with them for something I personally was doing, and it's very difficult the communication with these local people because unless you, it's like another area of the United States is Louisiana, New Orleans, that has its whole aura and its whole religion, really. Salem, too. And they're very, very protective of their turf. Unless you live there, can you work there? You cannot go work with them or be part of their group. And I thought it was so funny, but it's a tourist attraction, and a lot is a tourist attraction in New Orleans as well. But this is part of culture, I guess. I find it as being superficial culture, but it is as deep as it can be in that area. So you yourself had nothing to do with the witch culture in that era. You had nothing to do with that, do you? That's a question.
It's a question. In ways. I don't practice any organized religion myself,
Hmm.
but I have a tremendous amount of respect and
Hmm.
have been allowed to attend some rituals and the
Uh-huh.
like. Both the pagan, Wiccan,
Hmm.
neo-pagan,
Hmm.
earth-based type religions. I've
Yeah.
also been allowed to attend some of the satanic
When
rituals
you
that happen.
say you've been allowed to, what do you mean exactly?
That I am an outsider, and I've
Hmm.
been invited into it's sort of the equivalent of, like, I've never been Catholic, but I've been allowed to attend Catholic mass.
Uh-huh.
Things that are put on, by Wiccans or pagans are sometimes quieter because they don't want to be seen as a
Right.
tourist attraction.
Right.
And likewise with the Satanic Temple in Salem is beautiful. It's an
Mm.
art museum, and if you spend some time actually reading the equivalent of the commandments,
Mm-hmm.
the tenets of
Mm-hmm.
Satanism, they're very respectful. They're very much about consent and bodily agency and treading lightly upon the earth. Like, it's an earth-based religion, very much like paganism. And so
Mm-hmm.
being allowed to show up and show that you respect their beliefs,
Yeah.
regardless of where you fall in them, is an honor.
Yeah. 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 Interesting. Interesting. Kate, I'm so happy that you took the time to come and talk to us about a topic that is not very well known. And even when we hang up, it still isn't well known. It's something that will hopefully um, be clearer, and not only through Criminal Minds or things like that, because there's a lot to be learned from the dead. Period. There's a lot to be learned from a crime and a crime scene and the psychology of what moves someone to commit certain crimes in certain contexts. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Thanks again. And for everyone, her podcast is Ignorance Was Bliss, and on all social media platforms, it's at IW Podcast. Is that right?
IWB podcast.
Oh,
Like, ignorance was
IWB.
bliss. Yep.
It's there's no B here. IWB podcast. Okay, good, good. Even Instagram, right? And Twitter.
If I have to. Like, I rarely do Instagram. Like, but I will if I have to.
Instagram. There's an art. Once you get in there, it's a lot of fun. Thanks again. Bye-bye, Kate.
Thank you.